weapon may be formed, but it won't prosper. When the darkness falls, it won't prevail. 'Cause the God I serve knows only how to triumph. My God will never fail. Oh, my God will never fail. Now I'm gonna see a victory. Now I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. Now I'm gonna see a victory. Now I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. Whoa. There's power in the mighty name of Jesus. Every war he wages, he will win. I'm not backing down from any giants, 'cause I know how this story ends. Yes, I know how this story ends. Now I'm gonna see a victory. Now I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. Now I'm gonna see a victory. Now I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. Yeah. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. I'm gonna see a victory. Now I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. Now I'm gonna see a victory. Now I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. Oh.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Craig Finestead, one of the pastors here at the Water's Edge. I have been promoted to doing announcements this morning, so I'm very excited about this. So starting point does happen after our 10:30 worship experience this morning. So we're going to be way back in one of the back classrooms, which sets up our next announcement. The turkey dinner is this afternoon. Now, this is probably the biggest event that we do all year as far as mass participation in this building. So it's going to be from 4 o'clock to 7 o'clock. You won't be able to buy your tickets this morning. You can just buy them at the door at this point. But y'all have just supported this event in such an amazing way. There's a silent auction, just a lot of fun stuff. So this whole place is going to look different this afternoon when you come back. I encourage you to come, even if you haven't bought the tickets yet, just come tonight. And the food is amazing as well. It's always great. So that is tonight from 4 to 7. We Explore. For those of you who are interested in being members, encourage you to come on Tuesday night for our We Explore class. It's from 6 to 8:30. Leandra and I will be teaching that. So if you've thought about being a member here, encourage you to come on Tuesday night. Now, we're having a baptism class on November 18th. And we're also having a service of baptism at our 10:30 service. on November 24th. So for adults, if you don't remember if you've been baptized, if you haven't been baptized, we'd love to talk to you about baptism, and we're going to do a bunch of baptisms on the 24th at 10:30. So that is coming up there. Then one last one, next Sunday night, we do still have just a few spots for teams in our team trivia thing. So you can go to our website, weomaha.com, and you can take a look at all that information. But if you're new, that'd be fun. Just bring some of your friends and compete alongside some of the people here at the Water's Edge. It's always one of the funnest things we do every year. Now today is Veterans Day. Want to acknowledge all the veterans who have served. So if you're a veteran, could you stand? We want to just greet you and thank you for your service to our country. So thanks to all of you. And I think we have some active duty people here. Are you anybody active duty here today? As I saw you over there. So, Brian, thank you for your service to our country. And Dave Lawrence, I can see you there in the back. He's a veteran, but it's also his birthday too. So it's my father-in-law. So clap really loud on this one. He's a great volunteer for us here at the Water's Edge now that he's retired from the Air Force. So I'm going to offer a word of prayer for the veterans and for our worship experience. So, Lord, we want to thank you right now for those men and women who have faithfully served our country. God, many of them have long and storied careers where they have moved all over the country and lived all over the world. There's some who have fought in wars to protect even this First Amendment that we're enjoying this morning, the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion. Lord, we know that their sacrifice was not small, and on this day here in this place, we honor them. Lord, I also just pray your blessing upon our time of worship this morning. God, I pray that you'll open our hearts and our minds. God, I pray that you'll help us to be open to what you're wanting to do this morning. Lord, many of us have come with to-do lists in our minds. We've come with conflict that we're carrying. Lord, some of us might be coming with some emotional or physical pain, but God, help us just to set everything aside during this hour and just worship you. Help us, Lord, to listen to you. Help us to be present as you're present with us. So God, we love you and we come to you and we offer this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so as you're able, if you'll stand, we're going to now sing and worship God together.
There's revival and it's spreading like a wildfire in my heart. Sunday morning, hallelujah, and it's lasting all week long. Can you hear it? Can you feel it? It's the rhythm of a gospel song. Won't you choose it? You can lose it. Oh, 'cause there ain't nothing gonna steal my joy. I gotta know church choir sing in my soul. I got a sweet salvation, it's beautiful. I got a heart overflowing 'cause I've been restored. There ain't nothing gonna steal my joy. No, there ain't nothing gonna steal my joy. In the valley that I wander, turn to mountains that I can't climb. You are with me, never leave me. Oh, 'cause there ain't nothing gonna steal my joy. I gotta know church choir singing in my soul. I got a sweet salvation and it's beautiful. I got a heart overflowing 'cause I've been restored. There ain't nothing gonna steal my joy. No, there ain't nothing gonna steal my joy. Oh. feet till you find that gospel beat, 'cause it's all you ever need. It's all you ever need. Clap your hands and stomp your feet till you find that gospel beat, 'cause it's all you ever need. It's all you ever need. 'Cause I got an old church choir singing in my soul. I got a sweet salvation and it's beautiful. I got an old church choir singing in my soul. I got a sweet salvation and it's beautiful. I got a heart overflowing 'cause I've been restored. There ain't nothing gonna steal my joy. No, there ain't nothing gonna steal my joy. No, there ain't nothing gonna steal my joy.
You call me out upon the waters, the great unknown, where feet may fail. And there I find you in the mystery, in oceans deep. My faith will stand. And I will call upon your name and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace. For I am yours, and you are Your grace abounds in deepest waters. Your sovereign hand will be my guide. Where feet may fail and fear surrounds me, never fail, and you won't start now. So I will call upon your name and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace. For I am Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters, wherever you would call me, and take me deeper than my feet could ever wander, and my faith will make me stronger in the presence of my Savior. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters, wherever you would call me, and take me deeper than my feet could ever wander, and my faith will be made stronger in the presence
Sing that again. I'm yours. And I am yours, no longer my own. Raise me up or bring me low. Use my all or lay me aside. I am yours and you are mine. So come like a fire, and burn in us. 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 Oh, let me be full. Let me be empty. Let me have all things. Let me have nothing. Let me be full. Let me be empty. Let me have all things. Let me have nothing. Oh, let me be full. Let me be empty. Let me have all things. Let me have nothing. And burn in us. Come like a fire, and burn in us. Come like a fire, and burn in us. Come like a fire, and burn in us. Lord, thank you so much for letting us come here and praise your name. Bless this time as we lift our voices to you and as we learn more about you this morning. In your name we pray. Amen. You may be seated.
Good morning, church. My name is Leandra, and I'm the associate pastor here at the Water's Edge. I just want to extend a welcome to anyone who's new or visiting us, maybe for the first time or for the first couple times. But after the service, Pastor Craig and I would love to meet you, shake your hand, get to know you a little bit, and we just want to welcome you here to the Water's Edge. We're on our second week now of a series called In God We Trust. And this motto, In God We Trust, became the national motto of the United States in 1956. Now, I don't know if it felt more true in 1956, but it certainly doesn't feel that true today. In our country, I think our country trusts in a lot of things. We trust in our economy and military and in our politics and other things, and even individual Americans usually trust more in their 401ks or the real estate market or their education or their employer than we trust in God. And as if this motto didn't already feel kind of ironic enough, of all the places to put this motto, we printed it on all of our money, which is usually the thing that gets in the way of us trusting God or kind of competes with us trusting in God. So this week we're going to be kind of talking about money and generosity and how we can maybe make in God we trust more true in our lives today. And a couple weeks ago when Craig and I first sat down and we are talking about this series and planning it out, he's like, yeah, it's going to be our generosity series where we're going to talk about money and how to have a healthy relationship with money. And I was kind of thinking, and I told him, oh, I've never really preached about money. Why don't you take the lead on these ones? I know people love to hear about money. I'll let you do these sermons. Here I am, so we got to work on our communication a little bit better. But I understand talking about money in church can sometimes make people feel a little bit uncomfortable. And a couple weeks ago, I talked to a friend who had just moved to a new city. She's trying to find a church, and she found one. She liked everything about it. And she's like, well, when I went, though, they just talked about money the whole time. It was so annoying. And so she said for that reason, she didn't really like it. She wasn't planning on going back. And I asked her, what would you like to hear about? What sermon would you come into a new church, and if they talked about this, you'd want to come back? And she's like, well, I want to hear about things like joy and hope and how to build my relationship with God. And I agree. I think those are all good things, but I also think talking about money relates to a lot of those spiritual issues. I mean, how many times has money ruined your joy or taken away your joy in a situation? Or how many times have you really placed your hope in money or your financial situation and it backfired on you? Having a healthy relationship with God involves having a healthy relationship with money. So when we talk about money, we're talking about all those things. And last week, Craig kind of went over 5 reasons we talk about money. And the one my friend mentioned, maybe that church was saying, you need to donate to this church, you need to give your money here, and that was the whole sermon. I don't know. And talking about money in church and giving to the church budget is one of the reasons we talk about it. But of the 5 things on the list, it comes in last. It's 5th place. The first reason we talk about money is that God is very generous. And when we're generous, we look like God. And isn't that kind of the goal of the whole thing of why we're here is to look more like God and to get closer to God? And generosity can be a big part of that. The second reason we talk about money in church is because money usually ends up being God's chief rival in the world. There's many times where we come to a fork in the road where we feel like God's calling us to do something, but maybe we don't want to spend the money or time on it, and so it becomes a choice between those 2 things because of our relationship with money. And I know this personally to be true in my life. I remember when I was in seminary, I'd already, given my career, my life to be a pastor, to work for the church. I'm in seminary, and it came to the issue of tithing, and I was like, well, I don't know about that part. Everyone's like, you just gave up your whole life for the church. You won't let them in your bank account? I was like, well, that's way more than, my career, my life. And so money is just kind of this thing that of all the things God calls us to do, it's really a tricky one for a lot of us. The third reason we talk about money in church is because we deal with money every single day, whether it's spending it, getting it, keeping track of it, making decisions about it. It's something we deal with every single day. And if there's a part of our lives that we're dealing with every single day, we should probably be talking about it in church. The fourth reason we talk about money is that Jesus actually talked about money more than any other topic. If you go through the Gospels and count up all the lessons on different topics, money is going to be at the top of that list. And I think that surprises us a lot of times because we don't really picture Jesus as like this spiritual financial advisor. But I think Jesus knew the first 2 things I just said, that we deal with money every day, and a lot of times we're not very good at dealing with it. So he actually ended up teaching and talking about money a lot more than we realize. And we're going to look at one of those stories today here in a second. And the 5th reason we talk about money is kind of where I started, is that generosity allows the church to do things only the church can do. The Water's Edge and your guys' generosity has allowed this church to do a lot of things. Like right now we have a team in Uganda right now who's setting up medical clinics and serving people there, and that's only possible through generosity. Your guys' generosity built a playground on our land this summer, and I stopped by the church the other day, and there were 4 families up there using that playground, and that's only there because of generosity. Even here on Wednesday night, we had a couple hundred youth in here having a worship service, which happens every Wednesday, but when you really think about it, a couple hundred middle school and high school kids showing up for a worship service is actually pretty amazing. And that happens here every Wednesday because of your generosity. I remember my pastor growing up, I asked him what the best part of his job was, and he said the best thing that he gets to do, his best role as a pastor, is that he is the official thank you card reader for the whole church. Any thank you card that comes in from someone that the church helped or cared for or supported, he gets to read them. They're usually addressed to him, and that's the best part of his job, is being the official thank you card reader of the church. And if you go upstairs behind Craig's desk on this ledge, he puts up every thank you card he gets, and it covers the whole entire ledge. I think most pastors would put textbooks up there. Craig must keep his at home. But he has this whole ledge, and it's just covered with thank you cards. And most of those thank you cards are written to Craig, but the things they're thanking him for usually wouldn't be possible without your generosity. So at the end of the day, it's a ledge of thank you cards for the church. And Craig and myself and the rest of the staff, we just get to be the official thank you card readers for all your guys' generosity and the work that it does. So Jesus talked a lot about money, and we're going to look at one of those stories today of him teaching a whole crowd about money. And I'm going to kind of set the scene here. So Jesus has been traveling around town to town for a while. At this point, he's been performing miracles, teaching, having dinner with people, doing all these things. And he's kind of got a reputation at this point. Like when he comes into town, he's not like, hello, I'm Jesus. People have kind of heard about him at this point, and they show up when he comes into their town. Some towns he's famous, some towns infamous probably. But people know about him at this point. So listen to this story. This is from Luke 12. A crowd of many thousands had gathered so that they were trampling on one another to get to Jesus. Then someone called from the crowd, "Teacher, please tell my brother to divide our father's estate with me." And Jesus replied, "Friend, who made me judge over you to decide such a thing as that?" So let's stop here in the story. First of all, this guy clearly does not get what's going on. Jesus has come to his town. He pushes his way to the front. And instead of asking for a miracle or what's the meaning of life or, help heal my sick friend, he says, Jesus, my brother's not sharing with me. Can you tell him to share? This guy clearly doesn't know what's going on. I mean, imagine if Jesus came to Millard and was at the water's edge. It would be absolutely packed. If you push your way to the front, you get one question, one thing with Jesus. What's the meaning of life, some sort of miracle, whatever you need. This guy says, make my brother share the inheritance with me. This guy clearly does not know what's going on. And Jesus responds and basically says, I'm not Judge Judy here to solve all your guys' little fights with your siblings. I'm the savior of the world. I know all the answers to life's deepest questions. But then Jesus kind of sees this guy's heart and where he's coming from. And so instead of writing him off, he takes this opportunity as a time to teach a lesson here to these people. So then Jesus turns to the crowd and says, "Beware, guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own." So I think we hear this word a lot, greed, but I don't think we don't know really what it means. When I first read this story and I was thinking greed, immediately I just pictured some super rich guy, basically like Leonardo DiCaprio in Wolf on Wall Street with the fancy suit and the slick back hair, at the stock market every day doing whatever they do when they're there. That's kind of what I picture when I picture greed. But greed really isn't a financial situation or a set of actions. Greed is a system of beliefs. It's an attitude that people have. And what greed really is an inappropriate attitude towards things of value. And it's built on this mistaken judgment that our well-being is tied to the sum of our possessions, that how well we're doing or who we are as a person is tied to how much we have or what we have, the quality of what we have. Greed is essentially putting a price tag on yourself. When you define yourself, you look at that number, you're like, this is how much I'm worth, is my stuff. That's what greed looks like. And you don't have to be super rich to suffer from greed or to have this system of belief in your life. There are people with millions of dollars who suffer from greed, and there are people who make minimum wage who suffer from greed because Even someone who doesn't make as much can look at that bank account and be like, well, this is what I'm worth. I'm not worth very much. And as soon as I get more, as soon as I reach that point, as soon as I get promoted, as soon as I get the bigger house, then I'll finally be worth something. Then I'll feel good about myself. That's greed. And I think this is no secret to you guys that greed is very common in today's world. We're very attached to our things. We're very focused on getting more. A lot of things revolve around money today. And it's a pretty tough attitude to change because it's not just a rational belief. I can't get up here and be like, okay, you actually aren't worth how much is in your bank account and then send you on your way and you'll be cured of greed. Because greed is tied up in all these actually really emotional things about us. Greed is not just us wanting more money. Us is wanting some of these emotional things that money promises us. Because greed and having more money promises us contentment, safety, and fulfillment. And promises a lot of things, but those are kind of the three big things. And when we chase after money and get really caught up in money, it's not just that we want a bigger house or nice things. I think when we get to the core of it, we're really trying to get these three things for ourselves. And we see money as a way to get those three things. The great theologian Jim Carrey was talking about this. He's not a theologian. But he was giving an interview, and it was kind of at the peak of his career. Everyone knew him. And he was suffering from depression, and he was on this interview on TV. And he said, I think the best thing that could happen to people that I wish could happen to everyone is that they get rich and famous and get everything they want in the world so they can finally realize this stuff is not going to be the answer. And one of the most interesting things he said in that interview is what people don't realize is once they get rich and famous, they actually bring their insecurities with them. They think once they get to that point, like, oh, all these other problems in my life aren't going to follow me if I get to this point. And he's like, I'm at the peak right now. I'm at the peak of my career. I've been in all these movies. Everyone knows me. I have this mansion. I'm just as insecure as I was at the beginning of this whole journey. And when greed promises these three things, the first one is contentment. It's this idea of once I get this thing, once I have this much money, once I'm finally, have enough for retirement, then I'll finally feel content. And I got to work until I get to that point. But the problem with greed is that when we believe that, it never ends. Like the contentment is always one step ahead of us. We're always one paycheck away or, one down payment away from the finally being content. And then at the end of the day, we never actually get to the contentment that was promised. The second one that greed promises us is safety. That if we have enough, we'll be able to protect ourselves from bad things happening. It's kind of the idea behind insurance. Like, if anything bad happens, well, at least I'll have the money to pay for it. But if you live long enough, you'll eventually realize that no amount of money in the world can actually protect you from tragedy and pain and suffering in your life. It's an empty promise. And the last one, this is kind of the big one, is that greed promises us fulfillment through material things. It promises us that we'll finally be happy with material things when we finally reach that point. Once we've had enough, once we can retire, then we'll be able to relax and enjoy life. This is the main lie greed tells us, is that greed is trying to find fulfillment through money and material possessions when it can only be found in relationship with God. And that when we go back to this man in the story, he's coming up to Jesus and he's like, Jesus, you need to make my brothers share the inheritance with me. Jesus recognizes this belief in this guy's life. He sees Jesus and he's trying to find fulfillment and happiness through, once I get this half of the inheritance, then I'll be set up. And he doesn't realize that, Jesus Christ is standing right in front of him, that true fulfillment and true joy is standing right in front of him. And so usually when Jesus wants to teach a lesson, he sees this, he wants to teach a lesson here. He uses these things called parables. These are kind of short stories with a moral at the end. And usually these stories have a character in them that Jesus uses as an example. And the character at the end of the story ends up being one of two things. They're usually the hero of the story, like here's what you should do, or they're the fool of here's what not to do. Don't follow this person. And last week, Craig went through a story of this poor widow who came in, and even though she didn't have very much, she still was generous with her last 2 coins and put them in the offering. In that story, the widow is the hero. So all these stories have a hero or a fool. It depends on the story. So this story is about a farmer, and this is the story Jesus tells. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. He said to himself, "What should I do? I don't have room for all my crops." Then he said, "I know, I can tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll have room to store all my wheat and other goods. And I'll sit back and say to myself, 'My friend, you have enough stored away for years to come. Now take it easy, eat, drink, and be merry.'" So, is this guy the hero or the fool? Who thinks hero? Nobody, okay. Who thinks fool? All right, some of you guys have read the Bible before. I think we could tell from context clues that this guy is going to end up being a fool. But imagine if you actually just met this guy, or if this was someone you knew. Maybe you know someone like this. There's not as many farmers out here as there used to be, but let's say this guy started his own company. He invested everything he had. It kind of started off slow, but all of a sudden it picked up, and he made a bunch of money, and he worked really hard, and he kind of got to a point where he was able to sell the company off for a bunch of money, and he was going to retire at 50, and he was just going to move somewhere and relax and enjoy life. If you knew that guy, would he be a hero to you or a fool? Because that's essentially what this story is about, a guy like that. You know, this guy worked hard, he had a good crop, and now he's going to retire, and he's going to hang out. I think we know that Jesus is going to turn this around and make him a fool, but if I met this guy in real life, I think I'd probably be a little bit jealous of him. I'd probably admire him for his hard work and his success. But, you know, this is a guy he's going to quit. He's living the good life. This is the dream, right? And one of my favorite parts about Nebraska is that our state motto is the good life. When you come in, you see this sign. I didn't grow up here. I grew up in Iowa. But coming in, I would see the good life. And eventually, when I moved here, I just loved that was the state motto. And actually, if you go to Gretna, it's even better. It's the great life. So they took it one step farther. That's why everyone's trying to move to Gretna. But I remember when Sam and I were moving here in June. So I was moving from North Carolina. Sam was moving from Colorado. Both those places think they're better than Nebraska. And every time we told someone in either state, like, "Oh yeah, we're moving to Omaha, Nebraska," no matter what, they'd be like, "Why are you moving to Nebraska?" Like, there's nothing there. It's going to be so boring. You're going to live in the middle of nowhere. Like, what's in Nebraska? What are you going to do on the weekends? I even remember telling one friend, like, she was like, "Why are you moving to Nebraska? Like, they don't have mountains. They don't have ocean. You know, they don't even have a pro football team." I'm like, "That's where you're wrong." If you actually ask the people who live there, they do have a pro football team. But I remember telling her, like, "No, it's the good life. That's their state motto when you come in." And I'm not kidding. She said, "Oh, is that like a joke? Or like it's supposed to be ironic?" And I was like, "All right, now you crossed the line." But, you know, we might not have the ocean or the mountains or other things that those states have, but I really do think we have the good life. And I love that that's on the sign. You know, when you come here, people here actually know each other. Like, they know their neighbors. Sam and I have been looking for a house recently, and we went and were visiting one, and one of the neighbors came over to meet us, and like, we didn't even buy the house yet. You know, he was already ready to meet us. People here care for each other. They support each other. It's not as rushed and busy here. Like, I really think in my 4 and almost a half years of living here that I can truly say that it's the good life. I remember when I was living in North Carolina, I read this story that came through on Facebook about, some of you guys may remember this, it was a few years ago, but a family in Elkhorn was on vacation, and their 2-year-old son died while they were on the trip. And eventually they were coming back, and this news story was about them coming home. I mean, just unimaginable what it must have been like for them to come home. And the whole town, the whole neighborhood, the whole community had like decorated their house outside. The whole like neighborhood had blue ribbons on the trees, and there are all these things, people waiting to welcome this family home. They had a meal train, like provided dinners for them for the next month, just one more thing they didn't have to worry about. They had raised all this money, all these things to support and welcome this family back home. And I remember reading that and being like, that doesn't happen everywhere. If you've grown up in Nebraska or the Omaha area your whole life and haven't really lived anywhere else, maybe you're used to that, but that honestly does not happen everywhere. That's very unique to the type of communities we have here, and I really think that's what the good life can look like. And when I talk about greed, this is the problem with greed. Greed offers its own version of the good life, and it invites us to chase after this good life and to try and make this type of good life for ourselves. We learn about it all the time. We learn about it in commercials and movies, from the media. We learn about it from other people. We learn about all the time of like, this is what the good life looks like. It's a nice big house. It's a 401k that's going to let us retire early. It's fancy vacations and nice stuff and getting the newest iPhone right away. This is the good life. And it's really distracting. I think sometimes we get caught up in like, yes, that is what the good life looks like. I want that. Jesus tells us about a different kind of good life. And this is what he tells us. In John 10:10, he says, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. My purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. Jesus' purpose in coming here was to show us what the real good life looks like and to invite us to follow him and to actually live that version of the good life. The reason a successful farmer, who we would probably consider a hero, ends up being a fool is because he ends up spending his whole life chasing after one version of the good life instead of Jesus' version of the good life. And there's three things that this farmer kind of believes that get him off track. The first one is that this farmer thought the good life is about what we have. Jesus says it's about how we use it. Jesus really isn't concerned about how much we have, but he says the true good life is experienced when we use what we have the right way. My friend told me this story of he went on a trip to one of those apple orchards, and he went to the apple orchard for the same reason any of us do, to get good pictures for our social media accounts, to get cute pictures of our kids outside, family time, nice day, all that stuff. So he's out at the apple orchard. He's looking for the perfect spot for his Instagram of his two kids, and he sees this like amazing, perfect tree. It's beautiful. It's right in the center. The lighting is perfect. He's got his filter set up, and he's about to take a picture. And right in the middle of this moment, an employee comes over and like revs up a chainsaw and actively starts cutting down the tree right in the middle of his Instagram. No regard for the social media picture. But my friend said he walked over there and he's like, this tree, like, why are you cutting down this tree in the orchard? It looks like it's perfectly fine. It's beautiful, it's big and full. And the employee is like, well, yeah, that's true, but it actually has this disease where it's not producing fruit anymore. So it's not really an apple tree anymore. It's just kind of a tree. So we're going to cut it down and we're going to plant a new apple tree here. And I thought that story, that tree, is kind of what the farmer fell into. He built up this big, beautiful, picture-perfect life for himself. But at the end of the day, he wasn't really producing any fruit. He was producing fruit for himself, making himself comfortable and giving himself the good life, but he wasn't really contributing anything else. He was caught up in what he had and wasn't really using it the right way. The second thing this farmer believed is he thought the more you get, the more you have. When Jesus teaches us the more you give away, the more joy you'll find. And I think we all know that to be true. It's just hard to practice sometimes, but especially with the holidays coming up, we all love getting gifts. That moment when you open it, that's really fun. But we also know there's no joy like seeing someone open the gift you got them, seeing the kids open the presents, or you picked out the perfect gift for a loved one, and they're opening it up. There's really no joy like that. And this farmer got caught up in the idea of like joy is when I get more stuff. He never really got to experience the joy that comes through generosity. And the third thing, and this is where the farmer really gets himself in trouble here. The farmer believed that having more would guarantee him a happy future. When Jesus says generosity allows us to experience happiness right now. I'm sure, farming is not an easy profession. This guy probably worked extremely hard day in and day out to get to the point that he was at now where he could retire and live the good life. But throughout his career, the good life was always down the road. It was always, at the end of this harvest, at the end of this season, then I'll be able to live the good life. When Jesus says the good life's right now, today, we don't have to wait for the weekend or vacation or retirement. The good life is happening all the time. It's something we can experience all the time when we're generous, when we help others, when we spend time with each other. This farmer worked really hard for his good life, though, and it was finally here. He was going to experience this. He was going to retire. He was going to eat, drink, and be merry, hang out on the beach with a cocktail. But then listen to what happens next in the story. But then God said to the farmer, "You fool," see, fool, "you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for?" And I think this sounds familiar to us because there are so many people who use up their entire lives chasing money just to enjoy and relax and take in the life that they've already entirely used up. This is the trap of greed and the greed's version of the good life. We keep chasing it until the very end, always looking ahead, and we never get to stop and just appreciate things right now. We use our things, we store up our things instead of using them, looking for that someday when it'll finally, make us happy and fulfilled. And it reminds me of one of my friends at school who's also a pastor now. He was preaching once, and he was preaching about his dad. And his dad actually passed away when he was really young, so he never knew him, but he was kind of a public figure in their community. Everyone knew his dad. So his whole life, everywhere he went, coffee shop, school, football game, people would be like, "Oh, you're Steve's son, right?" Everywhere he went, his whole life growing up, he'd be like, "Yes, I'm Steve's son, nice to meet you." And he said every single time someone did that, they would have this amazing story about something that his dad did for them. They'd be like, "Oh, you're Steve's son. One time your dad drove me to work every day for 2 weeks when my car broke down so I would keep my job." Or, your dad called me once a week for a year when I was going through my divorce. Your dad sat by me in the hospital. His dad was just this amazing guy, and his whole life in that community was filled with these stories about his dad and these things that his dad had done for the community and for people. And so even though he never got to know his dad, he was surrounded by these stories about him. And I don't know if my friend's dad left him an inheritance or a lot of money or anything like that. But I know that my friend would say none of that would matter compared to what his dad did leave behind, is all these amazing stories of how he helped people and the impact he had on people's lives, the things he did that made a difference in his community. And I love that story about his dad because I think his dad spent more time living the good life right now than chasing some future good life. And this is how Jesus ends the story today. He says, "Yes, a person is truly a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God." At the beginning of the sermon, when I talked about how we handle money really does impact our relationship with God and vice versa, because I think when we're in a good place with God and when we have a good relationship with God, we understand the true role of money, and we also understand what it truly looks like to live the good life. Money is always going to be a part of our life. It's always going to be tempting to want to chase those other things. But acts of generosity can kind of be like a preventative medicine against greed. Whenever you do something generous, you kind of put money in its place as a tool, and God in his place as the one who fulfills and saves. Whenever you're generous and you experience that joy that comes from generosity, you're reminded of okay, this is what the good life truly looks like. I experienced more giving this away than saving up for myself or buying that new thing for myself. When we're generous, we realize there's more to life than just having more. And the farmer thought the good life just meant having a bigger barn. And then Jesus kind of comes in and says, the good life actually looks like having the right-sized barn. The right-sized barn for you. And I can't tell you today what the right-sized barn is for you and your family. That's something for you guys to think about on your own. But for the rest of this series, we're going to keep talking about money and generosity and talking about how to have a healthy relationship with our money. And so for the rest of this series, I want you to kind of think about this question for yourselves. How has chasing the bigger barn gotten in the way of you experiencing the good life? How in your life right now are you looking ahead, chasing the bigger barn instead of experiencing the good life right now? Where can you be producing fruit in your life? The world's good life is tempting. It's always going to be tempting. It's always going to be around us, telling us to get the newest thing, biggest, best, all of that. A nice car, house, vacation, retiring early, all that stuff sounds great. That does truly sound like a good life. But I think Jesus' life might be better, and I trust when he says, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. My purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. So let us pray. Loving God, I thank you for being so generous, for being a God that is generous to us with your love, with your forgiveness, with your time. We thank you that you're always there for us, that you bless our life in so many ways, and most importantly, that you give us an opportunity to live the good life today and every day. Help us not get distracted by all the other things that keep offering us the good life that we know are empty. Help us keep focused on you more than all these things that surround us. As we keep chasing money and these other things, help direct us on a path towards you, towards following you, towards being generous with what we have. As we think about the right-sized barn for us, help us be generous with what's left over. Help us find joy and generosity again. And lastly, I just want to lift up any prayers, any pain, suffering, confusion, doubts that are in this room today. Any silent prayers that are on people's hearts and minds that they've brought in. I just want to take a second and lift up all those prayers to you as well. We thank you for being a God that hears us and cares for us and answers our prayers. And we join together praying the way your Son taught us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
The good life. I can tell you that the turkey dinner tonight is going to be part of the good life. Just a couple of things we want to let you know on your way out today. If you are looking for prayer, if you have things that you just want to celebrate, or if you have things that have been weighing on your heart, we do have prayer team members that will be at the front sides of both sides of the sanctuary this morning, and they'd love to pray with you and spend some time with you and hear what's going on in your life and how they can pray for you. We do have Starting Point today. That's going to be in room 117. Lunch is free, so if you are looking to get a whole lot of free food today, come to that. Check out and learn about who we are here at the Water's Edge, and then come back again later this evening for our turkey dinner. One last thing is on the way out the door, we do have a few turkey dinner Thanksgiving bags and sheets that have some grocery shopping stuff so that we can provide turkey dinners for those at Together Omaha this year. So we'd love for you to pick those up on your way out the door. AJ, why don't you guys go ahead and close us out?
Thanks for coming, church.
Sunday